Many of you have seen this slide, and I love starting with this because it really feels like it provides the foundation by which we're operating when we talk about students with disabilities. I'm Kristin Wright, the Director of the Special Ed Division, and it is such a great pleasure to be in this position at this time with the level of support and understanding and want for systems change in California. And I had a call with our federal liaison yesterday who said she had watched the state board meeting and was reporting to her other colleagues that California is again leading the way around this system's coherency and the kinds of things that they would love to see at the federal level, which oftentimes we're not particularly in concert with. So operating from this foundation allows us to ask the questions that were asked this morning about equity, and I feel that special education and our students with disabilities have slightly been left out of that equity conversation. And as we talk about who they are, and these are the most updated numbers for this year, as you see, it's increased. And as special education or students with disabilities who are identified increased in a declining or flat enrollment across the state for general ed, it gives pause. And here's just a couple of stats. I'm not going to kill you off with data, but there is definitely a disproportionate number of boys, a disproportionate number of English learners, and as we heard previously, autism has increased more than 200% since 2005. So as we're talking about our students with disabilities, one of the things that I want to sort of put a little warning in front of, and this is something that's come up a lot in recent policy conversations, is in terms of dissecting students with disabilities. And I think just that it's a slippery slope. So every disability category across all the federal disability categories contains a very wide range of students, from students with very mild needs to students with very significant needs. So as we're sort of parsing out and trying to cut the data, we have to be really careful about the assumptions that we make about children and what their potential is. And the other piece that has sort of caused me pause lately is that whole idea that we're going to take the lowest hanging fruit first. So we're going to start with the kids with the most mild disabilities and help them because they're the ones who can really graduate. And that, again, is another slippery slope because we're putting a lot of potential on very, very young children who it is our job to give the system of supports to that will enable them to level the playing field and reach the same outcomes as their peers. So just that word of caution, we're not going down that road at the department. We see every child as a child with incredible potential, and those labels that we have are only labels for accountability to ensure we're not leaving certain groups of kids behind. And they're also to have us check our biases about which kids we have ideas about have certain potential, which kids don't. So in this whole equity conversation, I think it's really crucial that we're recognizing that all of our children are many things. And this intersectionality between the fact that many of them are poor, are English learners, our foster youth, and our students with disabilities simultaneously. And we shouldn't ask them or their parents to choose a group that they identify with, and that becomes what we're focused on. So as we're talking about a state system of support, we're really talking about a whole child support that is mirrored at every level. So if at the school level, you have your IEP team that dictates all the right people are at the table surrounding that child, whether they have trauma and need counseling, or they have English learner needs, or whatever it is, that those folks are there. If that idea is supported at the district, the school level, district level, regional level for support, and then the state level. And I mention this because we as a state agency are working really hard to break down those barriers at the state level so that we're not causing everyone to have certain behaviors that dictate them really having to parse kids out. And I know in this LCFF conversation, I think Mike would agree, that we've had in the dashboard as this 2/3 of students with disability, or 2/3 of our districts because of students with disabilities has been eliminated, that somehow we're taking from one of the LCFF subgroups that earned it and giving the money to special ed, right? But if you look at this, we're really talking about the same kids. And one thing I wanted to point out is if all students are 11%, each of those categories are disproportionate, right? So we understand that students who have multiple challenges are being represented in these subgroups higher. So overall, in LCFF, 70% of our students with disabilities are in one or more of the LCFF categories. So we are not talking about separate kids. So it's really up to us to figure out how are we going to, as adults, work together and align ourselves so that we're not forcing children to have to go into a separate room or with just separate and choose their outcome. So if we look at how we're going to do this, one of the pieces that I heard some this morning, not necessarily about students with disabilities, but I think this really fits in general, is that we first have to really ensure that education begins in the most inclusive environment possible. And how do we do that? This may scare some people, but I think we just need to stop doing segregated preschool. The reality is, I have not met a preschooler who belongs in a separate room alone. So, and that, in effect, has also led to preschool suspension. I myself, before I came into this job, did not know that there was such a thing as preschool suspension. In fact, there is, and that's another thing that is a conundrum. Oops. Okay. So the second piece. We need to be in relentless pursuit of communicative competence. What do I mean by that? How in the world would we know what a student knows if they are not able to communicate it to us, whether it's through standardized testing or through what they want and what they need? Our reading literacy, as you know, is extremely low for students with disabilities. It's absolutely abysmal. So for us to believe that they're going to get a high school diploma when they have very, very low reading skills and they're not able to communicate what they know, we know what that leads to, and that leads to acting out in class and suspension expulsion. So there's this really close tie, and you'll see this in the dashboard and in our own special ed data, between very low rates of literacy in math and very high rates of suspension expulsion. Finally, and I think this was mentioned earlier, that really supporting teachers is critical. But this expectation that we have for special ed teachers to somehow magically teach all the students with disabilities because they're too hard for the general education teachers to teach, or that the general education teachers say that they don't know what to do with them. As a special ed teacher, I always think about what I would want for my own child, sort of to your point earlier. And so if we're looking at our system in general, and this is happening across our teacher credentialing, where our new teacher performance expectations really do speak to training our general ed teachers to really take a larger number of students with diverse needs in their classrooms, that we have to subscribe to universal design for learning in our classrooms. We need to create these oases where every child can learn. And I recently went and visited a classroom that had one really simple thing in it, and that was choice seating. And so there were probably 13 different ways that a child was sitting and engaging, whether it was with a group activity or with each other. And the teacher talked about just that fact of this choice seating got so much of a higher engagement of that. And it was like a 6th or 7th grade class, you know, they're kind of wiggling, and they, watching their level of engagement and someone sitting on the ball and someone standing in the back with their iPad and having these multiple ways that they can work with their information, whether it's through the iPad or whatever, really changed the dynamic of that class. Having lessons that are designed by special ed and general ed teachers in those types of classrooms are absolutely mind-blowing in terms of the level of engagement we're seeing. I haven't seen a lot of that in the classroom visits that I don't know if you have, but it seems like as we look to what are those fundamental things, those non-negotiables that we have to start with, we have to start with these types of classrooms led by teachers who believe that every single student can learn. So the IEP, back to what Bill was talking about, the IEP really is a wonderful, amazing underused vehicle that we can really have our students get access to what they need in the classroom and in the school environment. It was never intended to be a discussion about if they could be in the general ed classroom. LRE is grounded in the fundamentals that students belong with each other. That's a core value of the idea. I'm not sure where that went awry, but what we see a lot now is you have a certain trajectory. And usually that can be predicted back to what happens in preschool. So if you start in a segregated preschool setting, the odds of you staying in a segregated setting is extremely high. So if we're talking about systems change, how we can rethink some of what we're doing, we have to change the pipeline. We have to start really early. And that isn't just about kids, it's also about parents. So as Bill mentioned, parents are really a big component in this. And we've heard from some districts that even tried to shut down their special ed centers. They had parents marching in the street saying, no, we don't want you to do that, because they've only learned that their kids are not safe if they're in the general ed classroom. And we want to teach them that they are. And in a recent conversation with the director of the Department of Rehabilitation, we were talking about employers and employment. And as we're mapping to employment for every single child in California, we have to ask ourselves who are going to be the employers in 20 and 25 years. The employers are going to be the same people that were or were not in the classrooms in preschool and kindergarten with those same kids. So if I never saw a kid with autism, if I never saw a kid with facial difference or using a communicator, I would be very afraid and possibly hesitant to hire them, because I just wouldn't feel like I knew what to do. And we hear that a lot from teachers, but a lot of that's because of exposure, right? So, a few suggestions. First, we leverage, honor, and develop a deeper understanding of the intersectionality. So we're really, part of doing that is having credentialing programs that are really blending special and general educators, so they're working together and seeing the intersectionality. So when they're working with students, they're not just seeing them as one thing. They're seeing them for all the needs they have, and they're bringing in their experts to be with them on that journey. The second, like I mentioned before, is really create universally designed education. This also includes school buildings and structure. We don't have anything in the state that mandates that you have to think through all this universal design about who's going to be using these facilities, every single facility. And so we know this has been really problematic for having kids with significant disabilities in elementary schools that have no place to change them. Things that simple have been barriers for kids to go to their own neighborhood schools. Again, like I talked about, having co-planned lessons and curriculum instruction that reaches the full range of learner. This is an IQC thing, right? Are we adopting materials that really get to the full range of learner, or are we really expecting special educators to kill themselves at night and on the weekends redoing curriculum? That's not how I want my teacher spending her time. I would like her spending it with my daughter, working in the classroom or working on her IEP goals. The next one is just my own personal little bullet, and that is really teaching citizenry and modeling community. There is no better way. This is where kids learn how to be together, is in school. If the adults have the behavior and the belief of certain things about certain kids, those are passed down and those continue on. And so it is our greatest responsibility to teach the citizens we want to have in the future. Around dispute resolution, we need to provide more local alternatives. Because of the way IDEA is built, spend a lot of state time and money on dispute resolution, due process and hearings. Not that I don't think that it is super important and within the law to make sure we have those procedural safeguards in place. It absolutely is. But we're currently spending 15 of our $23 million in admin that we get from IDEA on the Office of Administrative Hearings. And it's going up $2 million a year. And at some point, it's kind of like stirs and burns. Like, what's going to happen? And finally, some of the measurements, we have had a lot of superintendents call and talk about graduation rate. And as many of you know, the federal government requires, or U.S. Department of Education requires us to report a 4-year cohort rate. Now, that is slightly inconsistent with IDEA, which allows our students to be in the system till 22. So we have had some superintendents say, we are actually graduating in year 5 and year 6, many of our students with disabilities, but we're not getting credit. And for our students who are on the certificate track, they're being counted as dropouts, when truly we are getting them into jobs. So we need to maybe think about that as a system, how we want to remedy that. Because what we don't want is for students with disabilities to be seen as an accountability liability, and then people are trying to bifurcate or off-road our students with disabilities so they don't count somewhere. And I think we've done a great job, and I really salute our state board and Mike's leadership, our state superintendent and deputies and their leadership. They are fully committed, and I'm hearing across every speech and everywhere a deep commitment to each and every child, which is sort of an evolution from all but, right? It's really that we are all on the same page, from our Department of Finance and our governor. Everyone is sort of saying, okay, what can we do? And I think we've seen some huge signals in the budget that that's going to happen. We see the $100 million around special ed teacher residency and retaining more teachers in special education. We see a huge commitment to inclusive early childhood that we're going to be working on that's really exciting. So many things, including a real commitment around our state system of support and how we can really build expertise and capacity. And so I think, one of the last things I want to say is that as we rethink special education, we also have to rethink how we are delivering support as a state and what we're requiring as a state that keeps special education separate. And for many of you that work in the field know that a lot of that is around compliance and activities that take a lot of staff time and hours that are very inconsistent with the current timeline of our regular system. Those are some things that we have power to change right now. So for next year, we will be aligning all of our timelines for special ed with the LCAP timelines. That's a huge shift. We're trying to update our data, so our data is more in line with current data, as we always usually run a year lifetime. So people are having to say what they're going to do about old data when they've actually made some improvement. The elephant in the room is certainly disproportionality. The Office of Special Education Programs has come out with a newer methodology, some of you may know, which basically is identifying almost every single district in our state. So what does that mean? It means that it doesn't mean the special ed division is going to hire 500 soldiers to go out and fix disproportionality. It means that we collectively have to look at how we're going to look at our cultural biases, look at our pipeline starting in preschool, and thinking about how we're going to think about all our students for all that they are, including eliminating preschool suspension hopefully one day. And this, within our state system of support conversation, that the Department of Education really does help build capacity in regions instead of the department going out to individual LEAs and trying to do little micro treatments. That has not proven to be successful. So our focus is streamlining. We've completely reorganized our own division to be more friendly to our county office regions, to be set up in their vein. And moving forward, we will continue to work for that tighter alignment. So the folks that are working in special ed are no longer working by themselves on their own timelines and plans, but their plans are really integrated and part of addressing that overall plan. So I'd love in the future to see disproportionality and the plans to address it really integrated into the LCAPs so that we can really see that tie-in because our students deserve it. Thank you so much.